The Empire is locked in unending war. Beyond the light of civilization, its armies clash with furious beastmen, marauding orc and goblin tribes, and accursed sorcerers. Perhaps you thought yourself safe from such horrors, far from the front lines, hidden behind tall walls and lofty promises. Such lies no longer comfort you, because you have seen the face of true evil, the corruption of chaos, the dead return to life, or the blind and grasping greed of the Empire's own citizens. Worse yet, that evil has seen you too and marked you as a witness to be silenced. To survive, you must find your courage, take up arms, and fight back against the ravening hordes. If fate is kind, you will rise to glory and vanquish your foe. If not, the Garden of Moor will have your corpse. That is the premise of Warhammer, the Old World Role-Playing Game from Cubicle 7 Games, and I will share my review of the Player's Guide right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of Warhammer, the Old World Role-Playing Game's Player's Guide from Cubicle 7 Games. This 191-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $44.99. You'll get the PDF absolutely free if you order from Cubicle 7 Games. Now, if you want to just get the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $24.99. The Player's Guide and Game Master's Guide are also available as a collector's edition slipcase set. That is also available now, and it carries an MSRP of $159.99. Reason why I mention that is because we're actually going to be taking a look inside the collector's edition of the Player's Guide. So let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got the Player's Guide for Warhammer, the Old World Role-Playing Game. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Cubicle 7 Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. Now, keep in mind, this is a player-facing book, so we don't have to worry about spoilers. So regardless if you're a player or a game master, you can kick back and watch the entire video. You might want to watch the entire video because I'm going to be giving away a PDF of the standard edition of the Player's Guide a little bit later on in the video. So stay tuned. I promise it'll be very easy to get into the running. I also want to mention this review is going to be a little bit longer than usual, simply because I know a lot of folks out there are very curious about this role-playing game and how it operates mechanically. So I'm going to take a little deeper dive into that than I might usually do. So the first thing we'll do is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life. So let's give credit where credit is due. Also want to point out with this collector's edition, to my knowledge, the only thing different from the standard edition is going to be the cover. The fact that this is available as a slipcase set with Game Master's Guide. And look at that gold leaf. Fancy. All right. As far as the old world, if you are not familiar with this setting, this does take place on the same world as Age of Sigmar and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. It's just at a different time. So this actually takes place about 250 years prior to the events that take place in the adventures for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4E as we like to refer to it, WIFRIP. Now, as far as the mechanics of the game, if you are familiar with WIFRIP, then you're going to feel right at home because the verbiage is very, very similar, if not identical in many ways, as well as the characteristics that are utilized. Of course, mechanically, very different than miniatures and WIFRIP, but still, you'll feel right at home. Now, about 90 pages is devoted to character creation, talking about the characteristics, various different skills, talents, lores that are available, different careers that your character can take on. I do want to also mention it is entirely possible for you to randomly create your player character from the origin to the characteristics to the various different careers that are available. All can be done randomly, which will actually earn you experience points that you can immediately spend to improve your character after the character creation. Now, of course, you can certainly choose anything you want as well. That's not an issue. And you can kind of mix and match. You can do some random, you can choose some other things and still gain a few experience points here and there. So you're going to start off, we've got our different origins. So we have the Bretonian humans, we have the Empire humans, we've got dwarves, halflings, and then we have high elves and wood elves. Now, as far as our characteristics here, like I said, if you're familiar with the Old World miniatures game, as well as the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, it's the same. So we've got our weapon skill, our ballistic skill, our strength, our toughness, our fellowship, and so forth. Now, what is different is how these are scored. So in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you might have a strength of 40 because it is a percentile-based game. So if you were looking to do something strength-related without any sort of modifiers, you'd be looking at rolling percentile dice and scoring 40 or less in order to be successful. Here, a bit different. So the starting characteristics are going to determine the dice pool that you utilize when you're looking to achieve something. So maybe it's melee combat. Maybe it's researching something to learn about a clue of some sort or get an insight into something. Or maybe you're trying to scramble across a muddy field and try not to slip and fall. All of those things are going to require a test. I'll get into that in just a little bit. But whatever characteristic is being utilized, this is going to be your number of dice. So depending on your origin is going to determine what your dice pool is. Now, of course, there are going to be some modifications to that. Right here, we've got our characteristic modifiers. So you're going to be able to roll a 10-sided die to determine, once again, this is random, what you would be adding a +1 to. Now, there is a limit of 6 as far as the characteristics go, at least at this point, starting off. And of course, it's kind of the max that the player characters can have. Now, you can have monsters out there with higher than 6, but for the most part, your max is going to be 6. So let's talk about your dice, because all you're going to use here are 10-sided dice. And you're going to want to have a handful of these, and you want to make sure at least one of them is a different color, because sometimes you'll be rolling a dice pool. Other times you're going to be rolling percentile dice. And then sometimes you might have a number of dice you're going to roll and you're going to total these up. So those are the 3 ways you're going to be rolling your 10-sided dice. Now, these are the only kind of dice you need. So you don't need any other polyhedral dice for Warhammer the Old World role-playing game. As far as the character creation, we'll get into our various different origins, giving us a little more information about them. We're also going to get into some tables you can roll on for special options. So here we've got different talents. So as an example, with a halfling, the random talents would be careful aim, defensive stance, feigned flight, iron gut, etc. And then we're going to get our skill ratings. So as an example, a high elf, all their skills begin at 2. Raise awareness, athletics, willpower, and recall to 3. So awareness, athletics, willpower, and recall are skills. They are not characteristics. So what's the difference with the characteristics and the skills? So the characteristics determine the dice pool, the number of dice you're going to roll. The skill is the number that you're looking to roll equal to or lower than in order to succeed. So as an example, you might have a characteristic of 3 and you're rolling a skill, which is also a 3. That means you'd be rolling 3 dice looking to roll 3 or less. And of course, zeros here are 10s. So that would have been all around unsuccessful. I didn't even get 1 success. Now, of course, you're going to have a lot of different ways to improve your skills. We also have the lores, which lore isn't a skill. It's not necessarily giving you a specific number that you're going to be rolling equal to or less. It's allowing you to do certain things. So as an example, we might have city lore. So you might have the lore of a specific city. Now, the default setting for the early releases for the Old World is a city known as Talgad. So if, as an example, your player character comes from that city and they had a lore of that city, then they would know where the best place to eat might be, or a good place to stay, or where to find certain equipment. And then, of course, if you were looking to kind of drill down for more specifics, then that would allow you to test, to roll dice using a skill to see if you could know that information. So that's how the lores go. Also, if you're a magic user, you need to have specific lores in order to utilize magic. Now, once again, if you're not overly familiar with this setting, magic is not very prevalent. Now, it does exist. It is illegal throughout the empire. So keep that in mind. Most magic users try to play themselves off as being something else, such as scribes or scholars or advisors. So they're not walking around wearing their Gandalf hat or anything like that, because you have magic, for the most part, is a crime. That's why you have witch hunters out there. So then we're going to get into our careers. And if you are familiar with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, you're going to see some differences here. For one, the careers actually take up at least a couple of pages in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay because there's a lot going on there. With the Old World, a bit different. So here we have a single page, and we no longer have the various career levels for these careers. So that's something else that's very different than Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I will point out the way I've kind of looked at the Old World from my experience with this review and the upcoming Game Master's Guide review, this comes across a little bit like a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Light. It's a bit more streamlined in some respects. It should be, honestly, a little easier for newcomers to the Cubicle 7 Games line of Warhammer role-playing games to jump on board and kind of wrap their heads around. And the focus of the adventures feels smaller and a bit more personal, as opposed to some of the earth-shattering events that take place in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaigns, such as The Enemy Within. So let's grab one of my favorite careers here to kind of delve a little deeper into, and that is the Rat Catcher. So each career page is going to give us some information about what does that character do, and then we're going to get into the core information about this career. So we have the Rat Catcher is a brass social status. So that's something that's very important in the world of Warhammer, the Old World. And that is, of course, your social standing, your social rank. And I know some people might not be too keen on that, but I got to be honest, it is one of the more interesting aspects of role playing in the old world, regardless if we're talking about the old world role playing game or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. We also have very abstracted currency in the old world. So this is also going to determine the sort of coin you'll begin your adventures with. So each player character is going to start off with 3 coin, and it's of their corresponding social status. So we have brass, silver, and gold. Like I said, you're not going to be tracking individual gold pieces, silver pieces, brass pieces. Like I said, currency is very abstracted. We'll also get into the origins. So, what origins are allowable to be a rat catcher? Now, of course, if you were randomly rolling up your career, that's already going to be taken into account in that table. Then we're going to have favored characteristics, weapon skill, initiative, agility. These are going to be easier for you to increase as your character advances. We have skill bonuses. So you'll have +1 to 4 of the following as a rat catcher: melee, shooting, survival, dexterity, stealth, and willpower. So you're going to choose 4 of those and add 1 to each of those. Here's our lore as an example. As I mentioned, we've got the city lore as well as subterranean lore. We have trappings, which is essentially their gear. So it's kind of a gear kit that they're going to start off with. Their assets. So each player character is going to have some assets available to them. Most famous for the rat catcher is the small but vicious dog. We also have contacts. So there are not necessarily patrons, but individuals that they have some sort of a connection to. Maybe they're allies, maybe they're rivals. So we have the common folk as well as wanderers and wastrels. And then we have the career talents. So setting traps is the career talent for the rat catcher. Then it gives us the information about that. So we've got quite a few different careers. I got to be honest, just reading through this, I didn't go and take a peek at the core book for WIFRIP, but I do believe we have more careers available at the start than we did with the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay core book. Then we get into our contacts, and then we'll get our final steps for our character creation. One of the things I really enjoy most about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, not only is it the setting, but also how the player characters, for the most part, are fairly normal folk. Now, we're not looking at superheroes right off the bat, straight out of character creation. The player characters are individuals who have jobs, they have lives. They're usually tossed into adventures beyond their control. So something that's going to tie your characters together as an adventuring group is their grim portent. And what this is what has thrown these player characters together. Now, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, the adventure that's included in that, has a great way to bring all your player characters together, regardless of what their social status is. And that is what the Grim Portent is supposed to accomplish as well. So it's supposed to be something that has brought the eyes of evil upon the player characters. And maybe it's all the same thing. Maybe they were kidnapped and it was some sort of a chaos ritual that they were going to be sacrificed in, and they were all able to escape. But maybe they've seen the face of some important noble who was there at the ritual, who now they can identify. And now that noble's pulling out all the stops to eliminate the player characters. Things similar to that are going to make up the Grim Portent. So you may have all of the characters with the same Grim Portent. You may have only a few of the characters have the same Grim Portent. Got to be honest, you shouldn't have individual Grim Portents because that would sort of negate the purpose of them in the first place. All right, so then we're going to get into our abilities. So this is where we get into our characteristics. And then we have the skills that are based off of those characteristics. The skills themselves are very broad. So we're not looking at very specialized skills. So as an example, with the strength characteristic, we have brawn and toil. Those are the two skills. Essentially, if it's something that's a feat of strength that would be done very quickly, you're going to use brawn. If it's something that would be an extended length of time, then you're going to use toil. Simple enough. Then we also have talents. And these are special abilities that provide bonuses on your skill tests. They do cost experience points to purchase once you're already established as a character. So you can add new skills. We'll get into advancement in just a second. But we also have lores. So we have different kinds of lores. So we've got cultural lores, academic lores. We have enemy lores, magic lores. Magic lores are what magic users must have in order to cast spells. We've got trade lores. And the lores will allow you, as a player character, to do specific things. So, as an example, one of the trade lores is cooking. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, well, you got to roll dice every time you want to try to cook something. No, not at all. But it allows that player character to know recipes and identify ingredients, maybe eat a meal and be able to tell if, hey, you know what, this doesn't taste the way it's supposed to taste. I think there's something in this, as opposed to characters who didn't have the cooking lore. They wouldn't have any clue whatsoever. Then we're going to get into our gear. We're going to get into talking about our coin. Once again, it is very, very abstract. Unlike a lot of role-playing games, the gear section here, the equipment section, is pretty short. Then we jump on into our rules. And the rules themselves are fairly easy. So once again, we've got our characteristic that's going to determine our number of dice. And then we are going to have our skill that is going to determine what number we need to roll equal to or less. Now, we do have grim and glorious tests, which is another way of presenting these as advantage, disadvantage, right? So grim is disadvantage, glorious is advantage. So what happens with a glorious test is you will re-roll any failure. If it's a grim test, you have to re-roll all of your successes. So quite a bit swingier than just advantage and disadvantage. So that is important to keep in mind. Now, we also have basic tests, which is simply you're just rolling your dice, looking to get a success. And as long as you have one success, you're able to pull off what you're looking to achieve. Now, there are different levels of success. So as an example, if you only roll one success, it's kind of like, well, you're successful, but there's some sort of complication. Now, if you roll two successes, then you've completely pulled off what you were attempting without any problem whatsoever. And then more than two successes are going to provide you with some additional bonuses to your success. And of course, all of that's going to be up to the game master. Combat itself, also fairly easy. It is pretty abstracted. There is an interesting aspect of the battlefield, which I just happened to land on here, and it is zones. So we have different zones of a battlefield, and that's not necessarily ranges. So let's say we've got a farmyard, and in the farmyard, we've got just the farmyard area. Okay, so that's a region. And then we've got, say there's a well. That and the area right around that, that could be a region. We've got the barn, that's a region. We've got the field, that's another region. So kind of interesting. I do think the zones will turn out to be a little bit tricky if you're playing just strictly theater of the mind because we also have ranges. So we do have close range where you're in physical arm's reach. We have short range, and that's in the same zone. We have medium range is 1 zone away, long range 2 zones away, and extreme range is 3 zones away. But it's very possible that the zones aren't going to be the same size. So keep that in mind. And then we have the speed of the character, like how many zones can they move? And then with combat, we have opposed rolls to combat. So we've got various different modifiers that could come into play in combat, which are going to increase or decrease the number of dice being rolled. So with modifiers, we do not have changes to your skill number. We have changes to your dice pool number. So what we're looking at in combat, the attacker's going to roll, the defender's going to roll their pool. So we've got, say it's a melee attack. So it'd be the melee skill of the attacker. And then if the defender has the proper equipment, like say a shield or armor, then they can use their defense. You could also use their agility to try to dodge the blow. So you're going to roll your dice. Whoever has the most successes is the winner of that combat round. Now, if it's a tie, the attacker wins. So the defender must roll more successes than the attacker. Now, of course, we do have different weapons that do different damage. Now, one aspect of the old world, which is very similar as far as Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, your characters are relatively squishy. So you can't take multiple wounds. Now, it's possible that you may not even take a wound. You might be staggered. But then if you take another staggered result while you're staggered, then you have to either take a wound, give ground, which means you have to move back, you're being forced back, or go prone. There are different things that you can utilize, like there's fates, which are sort of like your bennies you can spend to improve different things. You can spend them or you can burn them. Spending them means that you've used it, but you're going to get those points back, those fate points back somewhere down the line. If you burn them, you lose that point of fate. So you're essentially getting closer and closer to your luck running out, is what happens with that. But as far as the combat goes, you're looking at rolling your dice. If you get a wound, you're going to roll on the wound table. For every wound you have on top of the first, you're going to add an additional die and roll on the wound table. So, of course, the higher results, the worse it is for the target of the attack. So, I mean, it's entirely possible if you've already got a couple of wounds and you got to roll 3 10-sided dice and you roll pretty high, you're going to be in pretty bad shape. You might actually buy the farm right there and then. So combat is very quick moving, pretty abstract, but there's still some of the aspects that we see in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that people really dig, such as the critical hits, right? Oh, I've decapitated the opponent, things like that. Also want to talk about magic. Magic is honestly probably the most complex aspect in the old world. It's not overly complicated, but it is a little bit different. As far as downtime, we do have a lot of different things that can be taking place between adventures. So there are different endeavors that a player character can take on. They can look to improve their skills. They can look to improve their characteristics. They can look to add a lore. So a lot of different things that are available in downtime. And I will also point out some of the downtime activities that are in here are some of the more interesting that I've run across in a role-playing game as far as downtime. And the way that you go about trying to improve your character is kind of interesting too. It's almost a little mini game-ish without getting like really deep in the weeds as far as role playing things out. It's kind of like, well, okay, well, we know what the focus is with the old world. It's on the adventuring, but we also do want to have some interesting activities going on during the downtime. As far as magic goes, we have miracles. So those are granted by the various different deities. And then we also have magic spells. So magic overall is relatively abstract here too. And we don't have hundreds of spells that the players need to worry about. As an example, with the magic spells, we have different kinds of magic. So we have sort of improvised magic, and then we have formal magic. So formal magic are magic spells. So they are the sort of spells that you would find in a grimoire, or a magic user is going to add to their grimoire. So they are going to be specific sorts of spells like fireball. Now we have the improvised magic, which based on the level of the wizard is going to determine what they can do. And the improvised spell casting is pretty interesting because it allows magic using characters to come up with spells on the fly without having to really bring the proceedings to a screeching halt. So I like that quite a bit. As far as spell casting, it is, for the most part, not instantaneous. So you are going to have casting rolls that need to be performed. So we'll use a magic user as, well, let's say a hedge wizard as an example here. So what they have to do as their action during their round is they have to say, okay, so I'm going to use this wind of magic, because in the world of Warhammer, there are different winds, different types. I know a lot of role-playing games out there called colors of magic, similar to that. And you have to tell the game master what wind you're going to utilize. You don't have to tell them what the spell is yet. You just have to say, okay, this is the wind I'm utilizing. And then you're going to roll a number of dice equal to your willpower as a casting roll. So you're looking to gain successes. So spells have a casting value. Formal spells tend to be more powerful, so they do have higher casting values. So you need to have the same number or more successes as the casting value. But the thing is, you can hold over successes over a period of turns. So essentially what's going on is that you need to build up your magical power to unleash a more powerful magic spell. Now we do have miscast tables. And if you have spell successes, you're casting successes, but you do not use your action in the round in order to cast a spell, you're going to gain miscast dice. So once you cast your spell, if you have more miscast dice as your wizard level, then you have to roll on the miscast table. And of course, the more dice you gain, the bigger the miscast is going to be. So really interesting, a little tricky rules wise, but not terrible. I have seen far, far more complex magic rules in role-playing games, that's for certain. Now we're going to wrap up. We got a few pages devoted to the old world, not a lot. There's about 15, 16 pages here. So I will say that as far as the player's guide, you're going to get kind of an idea of the empire and the time period, but outside of that, not a ton. So this is not going to provide you with a lot of lore regarding the old world, but it's going to give, as a player, it's going to give you a starting point. Then we're going to wrap up with our wounds table. So you're 27 or higher, decapitation. 1 to 3, superficial injury. So very nice. That is a peek inside the collector's edition of Warhammer, the Old World Role-Playing Game from Cubicle 7 game. Let's swing out over to the other camera so I can share how you can get into the running to win the Warhammer The Old World Player's Guide in PDF, share some final thoughts, and provide my review score. First off, as far as the contest, easy peasy. First, be a subscriber to the channel. Second, hopefully you give the video a quick thumbs up. And then lastly, simply let me know in the comments section what intrigues you most about Warhammer The Old World Role-Playing Game. Then I will randomly select one of those comments and announce the winner on my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, for June 16th. So you got a little more than a week to get into the running. All right. So as far as my final thoughts, let's talk a little bit about production quality here. Now, I'm 99% certain that nothing is different between the collector's edition and the standard edition outside of the cover and the gold leaf. I'm pretty sure that's it. As far as the paper stock, I'm going to take a guess. It is exactly the same. Both are going to have stitched bindings. They're going to hold up very nicely. Should mention, as far as the artwork goes, I was pretty surprised at how much of this artwork has been recycled from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. In fact, from just the eyeball test, it looks like all of the careers, all of that artwork is from WIFRIP, as well as other artwork throughout. Now, there is some new artwork too, don't get me wrong, and the artwork is actually really good, so that's not a problem. Like I said, I was just kind of surprised to see so much artwork that I have seen before. So that's really my only production quality quibble there. As far as the game itself, I really do feel that this is sort of a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay light. I know a lot of people are out there curious, why did Cubicle 7 Games even come out with the Old World, saying they already had WIFRIP, and they have announced that there is a 5th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay on the horizon. I understand why they did this, because number one, with the current lineup of Warhammer miniatures games, the Old World is set 250 years prior to the events that are taking place in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. There is no miniature equivalent of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay right now. So people who are playing the miniatures game, who might be interested in the role-playing games, would pick up Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and wonder, who are these personalities? What's going on here? The Empire's fragmented in the Old World. In WIFRIP, it's one empire. So I understand that, because it's a far easier way to onboard miniatures players into the role-playing game. Plus, it's also kind of a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay light. And I think mechanically, it's going to be easier to introduce people to the role-playing aspect of Warhammer than, say, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay would have been. A lot of people get really confused by the success levels in that are in WIFRIP. So I can easily see deciding to go with more of a rules light, more abstract sort of role-playing game. Now, does that mean that this is going to replace Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? No. It's my understanding that Cubicle 7 Games still plans on supporting not only the Old World and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay with a new edition of that, but also Age of Sigmar. So all three of those role-playing games are still going to be supported by Cubicle 7 Games. I will say I would love to see a conversion guide for the Old World so that players and game masters of the Old World could utilize some of the fantastic adventures for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, because there isn't a ton out by way of adventures for the Old World. And of course, we've got some absolute bangers out there for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, including The Enemy Within, which is fairly legendary. And as it stands, you can't run it with the Old World. But all in all, I do like the old world. I don't necessarily know if it would replace Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in my heart, but it's damn good. I will tell you that. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the player's guide for Warhammer the Old World Role-Playing Game an 8.5 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG. To do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a 5% commission on most sales. And all those commissions really do add up, help keep thegaminggang.com around. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal and become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find all that information down in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because if you ring the bell and select all notifications, YouTube is supposed to inform you not only of when I share reviews such as this, but also tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. as I bring you the latest in tabletop role-playing game news and more. Of course, when you're not watching videos here on the channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for our latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are never going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.